The video is sponsored by the poor who pardoned his Lord Abdullah Hassan Atman. Today's video is very important, and the question is as follows. Do you know what was the first work that the Prophet did after migration, or in another way, what was the first work that the Prophet did after migration? When you ask me and tell me when was the date or time for the construction of the Quba Mosque, or whether the Quba Mosque was built first or the Prophet's Mosque, I tell you simply, frankly, honestly, sincerely and honestly that the date of the construction of the Quba Mosque was after the Hijrah and the Quba Mosque, which was built first, and then the Prophet's Mosque. But since we have covered the biography of mosques, let us ask you a question. What are the three foundations for building your own state, or in the truest sense of the three foundations on which the Prophet built his state in Medina, the foundations on which the Prophet built his state in Medina? It is the basis for building any state. The first foundation is mosques, as it is the connection of the servant with his creator and provider, and this is the reason for which mosques were built. The second foundation is the relationship between a Muslim and a Muslim. The third basis is the treaties of a Muslim with a non-Muslim. Do you know when the Islamic State woke up? When did the Islamic State spread to all regions and countries? When I adhered to the three foundations on which the Prophet built his state in Medina. When I adhered to the foundations on which the Prophet built his state in Medina. As we said earlier, it is the basis for building any state and the consequences of the three foundations. First, the Islamic State woke up. Secondly, the Islamic State spread to all regions and countries. The disciples of the Prophet Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, Omar bin al-Khattab, Uthman bin Affan and Ali bin Abi Talib. The subjects prescribed to the Prophet, the eternal heavenly revelation. And we tell you in this video that the consequences of going to mosques are answers to your questions. How to gain a righteous man whom you love for the sake of Allah by going to mosques. How do you know your neighbors by going to the mosque? How to stop your hearing and sight from the forbidden by going to the mosques. How do you hear any threatening you by going to the mosque? These are the consequences of going to mosques and the benefits that Al-Hasan al-Basri, may God have mercy on him, spoke about. The benefits that Al-Hasan al-Basri talked about from the mosques. As for the places of peace, mercy and tranquility, you find them in the most beloved places to God, as we say to you, the most beloved places to God, the most beloved places to God are mosques, the most beloved places to God are mosques. And first line. What happens to you when you are cut off from life? What does a person wish to return to the world again? A person will wish to return to the world again, not to obtain positions and money, but to pray 2 units of prayer to God. He will wish if his heart was attached to the mosques so that he could shade himself in the throne of the most merciful. Things you do in order to seek shade in the throne of the most merciful. The Prophet Muhammad, may God's prayers and peace be upon him, said, 7 will be shaded by God on the day when there will be no shade but his, the just Imam, a young man who grew up in the worship of God, and a man whose heart is attached to mosques, and 2 men who love each other for the sake of God gather over him and separate over him, and a man who spends and conceals it so that you do not know what his oath is. What does his left hand spend? And a man who was called by a woman of rank and beauty and said, I fear God, and a man who remembered God alone, and his eyes overflowed. But there are some etiquettes that we must have. The etiquette of the mosque, which are purification, perfume, and wearing the best clothes. What do we learn from the verse, O children of Adam, take your adornment at every mosque? We learn from it purification and perfume, and it is not the best clothes, as Hassan bin Ali learned from it. The way a person walks to the mosque is when a person walks to the mosque with serenity and dignity, and not hurrying. Even if you hear the iqamah, but you do not realize, pray in what you missed, then complete. It remains to live in mosques with various types of mosque architecture, sensory architecture by construction and construction, and spiritual architecture through prayer, the Quran, and remembrance. What do you do if you hear the chanting of the lost? What do you do if you hear the chanting of the lost in the mosque? She says no, God will answer you. What do you do if you see buying and selling in the mosque? You say, God does not win your trade. The impact of mosques on the spiritual level. Firstly, psychological comfort was the Prophet Muhammad, may God's prayers and peace be upon him, if his party was a matter, fear to prayer and forgiveness of sins, according to the saying of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's prayers and peace be upon him, you burn. Then you will be burned, you will be burned. So if you pray Maghrib, you will wash it, then you will be burned. The effect of mosques on the ethical level. When you frequent the mosques a lot, morals are instilled in you, and this is the reason for which the acts of worship were initiated and perform prayer. Prayer ends in decency and immorality, and the remembrance of God is greater, and God knows what to do. The impact of mosques on the dawah level is the basis for dawah, and it is permissible for an infidel to enter the mosque to teach him. The impact of mosques on the scientific level. Mosques are universities for the dissemination of science and the graduation of scholars. The impact of mosques on the social level. Mosques are the meeting place for Muslims and the strengthening of relations. This video was today sponsored by the sponsorship of the poor who pardoned his Lord Sheikh Abdullah Hassan Atman on Saturday 13/8/2022 AD corresponding to Muharram 15/1444 AH. Do not forget to support us to encourage us to continue to publish more, God willing. Support us with a like and subscribe to the channel and do the bell button to receive all new